Imagine a place so serene, it feels untouched by chaos. A land of towering glaciers, quiet streets, and a community so safe people rarely lock their doors. That's Iceland, a haven of peace and beauty. But in the winter of 2016, this tranquil paradise was rocked by an unthinkable crime. A chilling mystery that left an entire nation shaken. How could something so dark invade a place so pure? Join us as we unravel the tragic story of Birna Brjánsdóttir, a young woman whose disappearance and murder uncovered secrets Iceland had never seen before. At the heart of Iceland lies Reykjavik, a city that feels more like a cozy village than a bustling capital. With just over 122,000 residents, it's a place where doors are rarely locked, strangers offer rides, and children play freely in the streets. Life here feels safe, almost untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Iceland is one of the safest countries on Earth, and its people live without fear. Even in the dark, snowy winters, Reykjavik glows softly with fairy lights, and safety feels like a given. But that peace was shattered in the winter of 2016. Just weeks after Christmas, the unimaginable happened, a violent act that stunned the entire nation. On January 22, 2017, a search and rescue volunteer made a chilling discovery. Battling fierce Icelandic winds, they spotted a body washed ashore in a cove at Selvogsvita, in southern Iceland. It was a young woman, just 20 years old, found naked and lifeless. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a shockwave. The entire country had been following her story since she went missing. What made this even darker were the clues that emerged. The return of a massive Danish frigate, and a trail of disturbing text messages tied to Greenlandic fishermen, now sitting in solitary confinement. What happened to this young woman? This is the story of a nation shaken to its core. The discovery of her body cast a dark shadow over Iceland. A country once known for its safety and warmth was now mourning the loss of a young life. Birna Brjánsdóttir was more than just a name. She was full of life. A 20-year-old who loved singing, traveling, and spending time with friends. She was the kind of person who lit up every room. On Friday, January 13th, Birna left her home, where she lived with her father and their cat, for a fun night out with friends. They laughed, drank, and enjoyed the city's nightlife. But at some point she got separated from her friends. Wrapped in a black fleece jacket, she stepped out into the cold night, and was never seen alive again. When Birna didn't show up for work the next day, concern turned into panic. At first, people hoped she was just resting at a friend's place. Her mother, while tearfully pleading for information, clung to hope that Birna might have taken a ride with a tourist, or joined a fisherman on an adventure. But that hope began to crumble when police released chilling CCTV footage. The video showed Birna walking alone through familiar streets. She stumbled slightly, regained her balance, and then disappeared. The only clue? A red Kia Rio seen nearby. Days later, the car was found damaged, with traces of off-road driving and bloodstains in the back seat, blood that matched Birna's. As the investigation unfolded, suspicion turned toward a group of fishermen from the Polar Nanok, a trawler docked in Reykjavik the same night Birna vanished. Among them was Nikolai Olsson, who had been drinking at a bar just meters from where Birna was last seen. His friend, Thomas Mahler Olsson, joined him later that night. While Nikolai was drunk and rowdy, Thomas was quieter, sober, and far less noticeable. That night, the two men moved through the city, leaving behind a trail of questions. What really happened to Birna after she left that bar? And how did a night meant for laughter end in heartbreak? 2 days after the night Birna vanished, Maria received a message from Nikolai. He replied to her check-in explaining that his fishing vessel, the Polar Nanok, had turned back to Iceland, though he didn't know why. At the time, neither Nikolai nor anyone on board knew that detectives were making significant progress in what had now turned into a homicide investigation. They had linked Nikolai and his friend, Thomas, to the red Kia Rio seen near Birna's disappearance. Police quickly traced the car's movements using city CCTV footage. The Kia was spotted near the scene of Birna's disappearance in the early hours of January 14th. By 6 a.m. it was parked at a golf course. When the driver noticed the camera, they sped off, only to stop again at the harbor. A man exited the car and boarded the Polar Nanok. The Kia left the area, but not before it returned at 11:30 a.m., making it a crucial lead in the case. With Iceland's small population, there were only 126 red Kia Rios to track down. And on January 17th, police found the car in a suburb of Reykjavik. They discovered it had been rented by the fishermen. Meanwhile, further investigation revealed that Birna's phone had been switched off manually, and its last known location was near Hafnarfjörður, close to the harbor where the Polar Nanak was docked. Armed with this new evidence and the identities of their suspects, police moved quickly, certain that the Polar Nanak held the key to unraveling the mystery of Birna's disappearance. The investigation was taking shape. With each new piece of evidence, the hunt for answers grew more urgent. But would the truth be uncovered in time to bring justice to Birna? On January 18th, the Danish ship HMS Triton raced toward the Polar Nanak, as Icelandic and Danish forces joined together to arrest the suspected killers. The Polar Nanak complied with the orders to turn back, as the frigate closed in. The police contacted the crew, asking three pointed questions. Are there weapons on board? How long until you reach Iceland? Where will you dock? The crew was tense, especially Thomas Olsen. Though he didn't yet know Birna's body had been found, he had received a text from a journalist, revealing that the police wanted to speak with him. The crew told Thomas they were returning because of an engine failure and decided to cut off the ship's internet. The first mate handed Thomas a sedative, saying, "If you haven't done anything, you have nothing to fear." Thomas remained silent, looking away. As the HMS Triton approached, armed police were flown to the Polar Nanak. As they boarded, Thomas quietly asked his colleague, "Wonder if they're here for me?" When the ship reached Iceland, an angry crowd awaited, demanding justice. 3 crew members were arrested, with Thomas and Nikolai held under suspicion of murder. Forensic investigators were closing in on the cause of Birna's death. When they searched the ship, they found a chilling piece of evidence: Birna's ID card, wrapped in a black trash bag and covered with Thomas Olsen's fingerprints. Police seized clothes from the suspects, including Thomas's and Inuk Christensen's anorak. During the trial, Christensen would testify that Thomas had washed the anorak, claiming a girl had vomited on it. But DNA testing told a different story. Traces of Birna's blood were found on the fabric. That wasn't all. The black Dr. Martin boots Birna had been wearing, found on a nearby beach, also had DNA evidence. The results were clear. Thomas Olsen's DNA was all over them, leading investigators to believe he was the killer. As the police launched their investigation, the whole country seemed to join the search. People across Iceland tuned into news stations, their hearts heavy with worry for Birna. While life went on, snow was shoveled, Christmas decorations packed away, a quiet unease grew. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, but the community knew they had to pull together. On January 22nd, the largest search operation in Iceland's history was launched. Over 120 search and rescue teams, coast guards, and police, along with 500 volunteers, scoured 7,000 square kilometers. With dogs, drones, cars, and a helicopter, they combed the land. But it was the helicopter that made the crucial find. Birna's body was discovered, washed up in a remote cove. She lay among volcanic rocks and black sand, with only a mustard-yellow lighthouse in sight. The search was over, but the pain was far from it. Birna's body revealed the brutality she'd endured: bruises, a broken nose and jaw, and signs of being strangled. Medical examiners confirmed she'd been thrown overboard while still alive, drowning in the icy waters. The bloody evidence found in the Kia Rio further confirmed the violent assault she suffered. With these grim discoveries, the case was beginning to fall into place, and Iceland's resolve to find her killer only grew stronger. Investigators pieced together Birna's last movements. At 5:25 a.m., she entered the red Kia Rio. Her phone was traced to Flatteround in Hafnarfjörður, where it was manually turned off. By 6:10 a.m., Thomas had entered the back seat, while Nikolai went aboard the trawler. Police believe this was when the brutal assault took place, hidden in the dimly lit harbor. At 7 a.m., Thomas was seen driving away from the harbor. By 10:30 a.m., he was caught on CCTV buying cleaning supplies and spending nearly 40 minutes scrubbing the back seat of the car. He was then seen carrying a large black trash bag onto the trawler, the same bag where Birna's ID would later be found. Nikolai was quickly cleared after the police reviewed the footage and forensic evidence. There was no blood on his clothes, no trace of his DNA on Birna's things. All signs pointed to Thomas Olsen. During the trial, 37 witnesses were called to testify. Nikolai took the stand, recounting the night through a fog of alcohol. He admitted, "I was really drunk." When asked about the details, he couldn't remember. He recalled leaving the English pub and heading to the American bar before going for a drive with Thomas. He remembered a girl entering the car but couldn't recall much about the ride. He said Thomas had dropped him off at the trawler, but he didn't know if Birna was still in the car when Thomas left. Nikolai's story lined up with the CCTV footage. But Thomas's version of events didn't match up, either with Nikolai's or with what he had said before. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to reveal a chilling truth. In court, Thomas Olsen denied killing Birna, but he did admit she had been in the back seat of the car, where her blood was later found. He couldn't explain large parts of the evening, especially what had happened to the red Kia Rio. Originally, he claimed he dropped Birna off alive and well at a Reebok gym in Reykjavik, but CCTV footage from the gym showed no sign of the car. His story didn't add up. When questioned, Thomas changed his account, often unable to answer or dodging questions. He seemed focused on shifting the blame, even suggesting Nikolai knew more about the crime. Despite Nikolai being drunk and unlicensed to drive, Thomas said it was Nikolai behind the wheel that night. He claimed he had stepped out of the car to urinate, and when he returned, Nikolai was alone. According to Thomas, Nikolai said Birna had decided to walk home. The inconsistencies piled up. When asked why he had parked near the area where Birna's shoes were found, Thomas said he had fallen asleep while handling a package. And the scratches on his arms? He claimed they were from sleeping, not a struggle. As the pressure mounted, Thomas blamed the police for his changing story. He said they'd shown him photos of things he didn't do and used threats to make him confess. But there was no explanation for the blood smeared inside the car, or why his DNA was found on Birna's boot. Worse, some of his clothes were missing, and they weren't on the ship. After days of testimony, the court made its decision. On September 29, 2017, Thomas Olsen was sentenced to 19 years in prison for the murder of Birna Brjánsdóttir. He's never confessed and he remains unrepentant. While the full truth may never be known, the people of Iceland stood strong, united in their pursuit of justice. The country didn't let fear win, it ensured Birna's killer was brought to account.